I'm Stacey.
I'm Jenny.
And this is Learning for Life,
a homeschool podcast.
We are two homeschoolers who use different methods, curriculum, and strategies to make it all work.
Our goal is to help parents teach kids how to develop a lifelong love of learning. Hello and welcome to this homeschool how-to. I'm Jenny, and these homeschool how-tos are just really quick little podcast episodes in which we are able to dive into very specific homeschool topics. So today, I am going to be talking to you about handicrafts. To me, handicrafts are really fun and actually even important to do, and I'll explain why. Handicrafts are anything like sewing, crocheting, woodworking, leather working. I don't know what that's called, but like doing the whole leather thing where you decorate the leather with different patterns and stuff. All these activities are really, really fun for kids, and they also teach them life skills. And something that I've also noticed in my own kids, which I was not anticipating, is that teaching these skills really builds confidence in your kids, because then they feel like they can go off and do something on their own, and they don't necessarily need an adult's help, and they can go create something and be really proud of it. And I want to add here that my children are 7 and 5, and I also have a toddler, but she doesn't do handicrafts yet, at least nothing that looks like a real handicraft. But, my kids are young. And they're already doing a lot of these things. So if you're listening and you're like, my kids couldn't do it, just give it a try, because, it won't hurt. And you can always, if something is a little too advanced for your children, you can always just, put it down and maybe pick it up next year, because that's what I did. I tried teaching crocheting a couple years ago to my kids. They were clearly way too young back then. They couldn't even figure out how to hold the yarn. And this year they really took to it. So that's just an example of just sometimes time fixes everything, and your kids will just grow and be able to grow into these skills. So my advice with starting handicrafts is kind of no matter what your children's ages are, you always want to start easy and based on ability level. So if your kids already know how to sew, like they had to learn how to sew for practical purposes, then great. Maybe introduce a new pattern or something like that. Or if your children have no handicraft experience, then start with something super easy. So one thing that I suggest is starting out with the pot holder looms. And these are something I did as a kid. It's really, really easy. They sell them at craft stores. I think even places like Target and Walmart probably sell them. Or I'm sure they're available on Amazon as well. And it's just a really easy craft. And then at the end, they have a new pot holder that they can maybe give to someone as a gift or use themselves if they're cooking. So it's really easy, and it's really fun too. And there's a lot of different colored rubber band things that they use with it. So that's always fun. I also suggest these little beginning sewing craft kits. They're not really sewing. They're very, very basic, but I've seen them at Joann's and I've bought some. The ones that my kids and I have done are you create little keychains, little stuffed animal keychain type things. So you have to cut out the fabric in the pattern or something like that, and then put the stuffing in, and then sew around it with yarn, and it already has the holes planned out and stuff. So it's just a very early introduction to the concept of sewing. They're not using an actual sharp needle or anything, and they're using yarn, not thread. But it just introduces how it should work when you are actually sewing. Activities like crocheting, knitting, whittling, which is something my daughter really wants to get into, and leatherworking are just slightly more advanced options that maybe slightly older kids could do, but even the younger kids could do them too. You can always give them a try. Like I said, doesn't hurt to try, right? And you also want to try to find really helpful resources either in your area or somewhere online that you can use to help teach these skills if you personally are not really considered an expert in any of them. So, for example, when I was teaching my daughter's crocheting, obviously I know how to crochet, but sometimes watching a tutorial online is easier than being taught in person, especially with one of my daughters who's extremely visual. So we used just crochet tutorials from my personal favorite crochet tutorialist, Bella Coco. So I'm going to link to her in the show notes just so you can check that out if you're interested in watching her beginning crochet tutorials. That's just one example. You can also look in your area for classes. So I know Joanne's teaches like a ton of different craft classes. I know I've taken sewing and crocheting from there, which was completely priceless in my life. But I know that there are other, like even just specific homeschool vendors that do woodworking or leatherworking or all those things. So those are just some ways that you can kind of rely on your community to teach these classes. So it's not, I just don't want anyone to really feel completely alone trying to teach these things, because I understand that some people just don't have experience in these fields, which is totally fine. Because I also want to suggest that if you're new to these skills, maybe you can learn alongside your children. Like, how fun would that be to not only have your kids learn these skills, but you also learn with them? And that will give you just maybe some new perspective on learning a new skill and realizing it is hard and we have to give kids grace when they're learning these new skills, and just making it as fun and maybe even just short lessons so that your kids are going to develop a lifelong love of practicing these skills. And like I said before, like there's nothing like a kid who has just learned a handicraft and is now super confident, and they've been working on their fine motor skills and they just feel like they can really be creative with this new skill that they have. So that's why I just feel so passionately about handicrafts. Like, even if we didn't do any homeschool lessons in a day, if my kids went and sat in a quiet corner and started working on one of their fleece tie blankets, or went and worked on crocheting some granny squares, to me that's super rewarding, and that makes me feel like the day was still a success. So yeah, those are just some of my tips for teaching handicrafts and why handicrafts can be so important. So if you have any questions about how to teach handicrafts or anything like that, feel free to email us at kidslearningforlife@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook, links in the show notes. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, to give us a 5-star rating if you liked what you heard, because that really goes far to help other people find the show. And with that, I guess it's time to say, see you next time.